Swamp Dweller. I've been listening to your stories for some time, and it made me start thinking about some of the crazy things that I've seen and I've lived through. I have several unusual stories, but the one I'm going to tell you about took place in 2010 when I was living, well, more like couch surfing, in Burlington, Vermont. My living situation was tricky at the time. My daughter's mother had kicked me out and moved some dude from the Midwest into our home. I'm not dwelling on that, just explaining why I was sleeping on a couch at the time. I had several roommates, one who we'll call Chuck, who had a girl named Molly always hanging around. So one night, we had some friends hanging out. Our friends Brian and Lily were hanging out. We drank tea and talked about the Blair Witch movie and how crazy people went over it. It was then that Brian said, "Hey, has anyone taken David to the haunted beach?" Everyone got real quiet. Chuck spoke up. "I don't think anyone has." Me, being into the paranormal, had my interest immediately piqued. "You want to go?" I said to no one in particular. It was late, around 2 a.m. if I remember correctly, but everyone was pumped up on caffeine, and we all thought it would be a great idea. Chuck told me I should bring something for fighting what he called the demon. We all grabbed our spiritual gear, well, those who had some, and I held my sword. Yeah, I know how it sounds, a sword, but it was one of the only things I had at the time to keep me safe from many spirits and/or crazy people, or maybe even predators. As crazy as my sword may sound, I think Brian had some prayer beads or something, and Chuck and Molly did some prayer in front of Chuck's little Wiccan shrine. I didn't notice Lily do anything unusual, but she did check out my sword with a real look on her face. It's a look that I don't really know how to describe. After that, we all hopped in Chuck's car and headed south. We went south of Burlington for a few miles. I won't say where because of some of the events that happened. I don't want people screwing around there. The night was calm, very serene if you will. The cloudless sky and the stars twinkled very brightly. Brian and I stared out one side. We were all trying to get in the right mind frame, you know. Molly, though, she didn't seem exactly experienced in this type of thing. She seemed to like the paranormal and all things that go bump in the night, but I don't think she actually necessarily believed we would see something. She was scared because she didn't want anybody to go without her. She didn't want to be left alone, basically. We got within a mile of this beach when things started going haywire. Out of nowhere, a freak storm rolls in, and the rain started coming down in sheets. We had tornado-like winds, branches being torn out of trees, and everything dropped all around the car. It seemed like an absolute war zone. Chuck pulled over, like nothing was out of the ordinary, and said, "We're here." At this point, I had my sword close to me because I knew I was going to need to use it at this point if things were going to be this wild. Branches were still being flung at the vehicle. I moved away toward the beach solo. Lily and Brian moved to catch up with me. I felt like there were eyes on us. I felt watched. So I asked, "Anyone else feel it?" Brian replied, "Like we're being watched?" Lily nodded. "Okay, just wanted to make sure it wasn't just me." We went down onto the beach, and in the middle of it was an enormous maple tree that I had seen ever since moving to Burlington. It was so large that the three of us couldn't put our arms around it. The tree was putting off a sadness. That's the only way to describe it. It was an overwhelming feeling of sorrow. I looked out at that lake, usually a very calm body of water, and I kid you not, there were foot-high waves rolling in and crashing at the shore. Chuck said, "Don't go in the water. Many people have drowned there over the years. The beach, it likes to eat people, especially young people." It was weird how he smiled at the water. The beach and forest were both going nuts, absolutely haywire, but it seemed to almost have been some sort of private joke. He pointed a little further south and said, "The bridge, it's the worst though. I think that's where the Maine demon lives." Molly didn't want to go to the bridge. She acted very frightened, like she knew something was there. Lily and Chuck decided to stay on the beach with her and Brian, and I went to inspect the bridge. It was a really old covered bridge, the kind of picturesque Vermont is known for. We stood in front of the bridge for a few minutes, the rain dumping down on us like mad. We looked at each other to see who would take the first step onto the bridge. I took a deep breath, nodded, and stepped on. It was honestly like entering an entirely new world. There was barely any sound on the bridge. We could see the rain still coming down on either side of the bridge, but it was like we were in a sound vacuum. The hair on my body stood up all over. I felt dry lightning across my skin as I walked further into the bridge. I got about halfway onto the bridge when I heard Brian laughing softly, but he got louder as he moved closer. That's when it hit me. Brian didn't come with me. I came alone. So who was this? Or better yet, what was this? I slowly turned around to see this thing that was mimicking Brian had discolored eyes. They were almost blood red looking, but I could tell that it was having trouble walking as well, almost walking with a limp, if that makes any sense. But not a limp as if it were hurt, more like a limp as if it didn't know how to stand up correctly on two legs. That's when I heard my friends yelling from the beach. The storm was getting really bad, and it was to a point now that we had to get out of there or things could get even worse. Almost as if an act of God was made, the rain stopped for a few minutes and gave me the chance to run past this thing and go back to my friends. They were all waiting for me in the car, and the moment that I shut the door suddenly, it was as if the rain started up even tenfold. We got out of there, and I'll never forget this experience. Maybe there is a demon at that place, I don't know. Maybe that beach really is haunted. Maybe there is something more than what meets the eye. But I can tell you this, whatever mimicked my friend that day, I was gonna need more than a sword to fight it off. Every kid growing up feels that they're being watched in the middle of the night or that there are monsters under their bed. Their parents would show them that there was nothing to be afraid of, assure them that the monsters did not exist, and be the end of things. I was one of those kids. Every night before I went to sleep, I would check under my bed and look inside my closet to make sure nothing was there. After determining they were both clear, I would go to sleep. I grew out of that constant fear and dismissed the idea of monsters, but I never thought that the fear would one day catch up to me. It was a bright summer day in West Dover, Vermont. I was on a weekend getaway with two of my closest friends, Jay and Dean. We were all 16 years old at the time, getting ready to start our junior year of high school in about 3 weeks' time. Our families are very close, and Jay's family offered a trip to the rest of us. Jay's grandfather owns a cabin at the edge of the Dover County Forest next to Cheney Brook. They would use the house in the winter during the ski season whenever they wanted to ski on the mountain that overlooks the valley. It's absolutely beautiful. It was particularly remarkable that August morning, only about 66 degrees by midday. My friends and I, avid hikers, and we loved all the small trails. Most of them I don't think go any longer than 6 miles, and they only go right past the cabin. Seeing this as an opportunity to get away from our families, we packed up a tent, some sleeping bags, and some other essentials and headed out on the trail. We made our way to the trailhead on the other side of the development and turned around at about 4 p.m. We got about 4 miles in on the walk back and decided to set up camp since it was dark. We found a clearing on the side of the trail and got to work. I built a fire pit out of rocks that I found in the area, while Jay and Dan gathered sticks to build a fire. We got the fire going, and around 7:30 started cooking the hot dogs we had brought in. We played some music, shared a few stories, and had quite a lovely time. Jay brought 3 beers from the fridge in the cabin, so we cracked one open and sipped on them while we were eating. The fire began to dim around 8:30 or so we all went out to grab more sticks. While I was collecting sticks, the speakers stopped playing music since my phone's Bluetooth was out of range. For a few minutes, I got a chance to listen to the natural sounds of the wilderness around us. However, I noticed there were no sounds. No birds chirping, no crickets making noise, not even a breeze making the leaves rattle. It was silent. I felt uneasy and made my way back to camp. The whole time I was walking around, I felt as though I was being watched, and a chill ran down my spine. Once I got back to the fire with my sticks, I could see the confusion on Jay's face. He was facing the opposite way of me when I got back and seemed confused to see me when he turned around. "How did you get behind me so fast? I was talking to you a second ago over there." He pointed off in the direction he had been looking before I returned, and I assured him that I was never over there. "Well, what did you need help with then? You kept saying, 'Help me.'" At this point, I was on edge. No one else was on that trail with us at this time of night, and Dan was only a couple of meters away from me when we were collecting sticks, so I knew it wasn't him messing around with Jay. At this point, Dan came back and we all decided that it was probably nothing. We did not play any more music at that point, and the sounds of the wild sparked back up like wildfire. A good hour went by and we all felt pretty tired. Dan went into the tent and Jay and I were getting ready to put the fire out. Then, it happened again. Jay and I didn't like the vibe in the area, and we were hesitant to stay out, but we did anyway.
"Hey."
Jay and I both turned around fast. A voice called from the tree line, and we were startled.
"Help me.
The voice called out again.
Help me."
The voice was deep and distorted, and it just didn't sound right. Jay and I were on edge, and Dan just came back out of the tent. "Did you hear that?" he asked. We were all looking off into the tree line for about 15 more minutes, but whatever was there had gotten quiet. Jay turned on the video camera that he brought with him and began filming the tree line to see if he could spot anything. Suddenly, we heard a shriek. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It started like an elk, but had more of a human nature behind the voice. We all stood up. Again, we heard this shriek, only this time it was much closer. Terrified, we all jumped into the tent. I knew that whatever was out there was not an elk, because elk in this area are very uncommon, and they have a higher, more consistent pitch than the thing that was screeching. We heard the shriek again, but it didn't seem as close as the one before. No, all of us went into panic now though, looking to each other for answers and a way to get out of this. At this point, Dan opened the tent door. He got out of the tent and began to run. Jay and I exchanged looks and followed him down the trail. We were running faster than we ever had before. We had all ran cross country, so we knew how to pace ourselves. The only difference is that this is a different kind of adrenaline. Running through your body, it changed that mindset. We sprinted as fast as possible. The sky was clear and the moon was almost complete, sending its light through the canopy to light the trail back. The entire time we ran, we could hear rustling in the bushes behind us and the eventual groan of whatever was chasing. About a mile away from the trailhead, we were all pretty tired and began to slow down significantly. At this point, we heard something dart past us in the brush. It moved faster than anything I had ever seen before, and we all stopped dead in our tracks. None of us knew what was going on, and I had never had so much fear in my body. We saw a shadow dart across the trail in front of us, and once again it went back into the brush. We began running again. It almost seemed like it was circling us as it followed us back to the cabin. It only took us 12 minutes to cover the 2 miles of trail to the house, and as soon as we made it to the trailhead, we took off toward the cabin. We made it to the door, ran inside and locked it behind us. We then frantically ran to every door and window in the cabin, ensuring they were all closed and locked. Jay's parents, who were the only ones up, did not understand why we were back so early from our hike, but we heard a thud on the roof before they could ask us any more questions. We all got very quiet. We listened to the second thud, followed by 2 more, progressively moving towards the deck. The thuds turned into footsteps, and then it suddenly stopped. We were all anxiously watching the deck, waiting to see what would jump down, but I don't think we expected to see what we did. A loud crash came from the deck, and in front of us was a man. However, he didn't look quite right. He looked as if he had not eaten in a long time, made up of only skin and bones. His eyes were pale and looked glazed over. He was almost bald, with only a few strands of hair. His hair was silver, making him look incredibly old in addition to the wrinkles in his skin. His skin was white as the snow around him, and he was completely undressed. He seemed much taller than any normal man I had previously seen before. However, I couldn't tell you exactly how tall he was because he was on all fours. I realized right then and there that whatever was on the other side of that door was not a human being. It didn't even look human. It stared right through the glass at us, its pale, lifeless eyes not blinking or moving an inch. All of us looked right back at it, absolutely terrified and dumbfounded. It screeched loudly and jumped back onto the roof, and we never saw it again. All of us were too scared to go to sleep, and once the sun came back out, we felt a sense of security that we hadn't felt that night. Jay had recorded the majority of the encounter, and after going through the tape multiple times, we are still at a loss for words. We never went back for the stuff on the trail that weekend, and a year later during the winter, we hiked back out to find that some of it was still there. However, we didn't go out unarmed. I wasn't a big believer in the paranormal before then. I would go on urban explorations with the guys a lot before that, and we would see all kinds of cool things and hear things we could never explain, but I would always brush it off. But this was different. This was real, and what I saw with my own two eyes I don't think I can ever unsee. I don't think I can ever get it out of my mind. We got lucky that day. I have had trouble going back into those woods ever since, and I have been hesitant to stay at the cabin during the ski season. Since then, Jay's grandfather has changed the locks, so I feel safer than before, but part of me always feels like someone, or something, is up there, watching me, waiting. After some research, I have found other encounters with something similar to what we have seen all over Vermont, and from what I've found, it's most accurately described as a wendigo. The wendigo is a legend created by the Algonquin people to deter those in the tribe from falling into the grasp of greed and to deter practices of cannibalism. But every tale has its truth. I can't be sure, but I'm pretty sure what I saw was a wendigo. To preface this, I was about 13 years old at the time. I lived in the middle of the woods in Vermont. My house was actually surrounded by miles and miles of woods, with the only place nearby being a farm down the road a bit. I lived there with my father, stepmother, and 3 sisters, 1 being older and 2 being younger. This happened over the summer when my father and my stepmother were at their jobs. My baby sister was left with her grandmother for the day. On days like this, when my teenage sisters and I were left alone with the house to ourselves, we would explore the woods. With our overprotective father usually not letting us do anything outside, we were very familiar with those woods and even had a fort built in it, pretty close to the house. But really, we wouldn't really travel further than that. One day, while everyone was gone, we had decided to explore deeper into those woods. We started walking in one direction, which led us so deep into the forest that the trees completely blocked out the sun, and it was hard to walk between the trees and shrubs. I think that day, we walked close to a full mile into the woods. We stopped walking when we reached a small abandoned shed. My younger sister pointed something out while we were digging around the shed and trying to open the locked door. "It smells like rotten meat here," she said. And sure enough, there was a faint smell of rotting meat. And as I moved my head closer to the shed door, it was apparent the smell was coming from inside. Once she said that out loud, we could hear something more profound in the woods, like the sound of someone breaking into a sprint. I don't know how to explain it, but the thing that was running sounded like it was on 2 legs, like the footsteps sounded as if it were someone who was bipedal, but it was much heavier than a human being, which scared the absolute crap out of my sister and myself. We all snapped out of our frozen terror when my older sister realized it sounded like it was coming toward us and started running back to where the house was. I grabbed my younger sister's arm and started running back too, and yanked her so she would be in front of me instead of being dragged behind. I wasn't and still am pretty out of shape, so I was much further behind my sisters as we kept running. I never turned back to look at what was chasing us though, and didn't know how far back it was. I remember feeling something tugging at my shirt. Either it was a person, or more realistically it got caught on a tree, and that alone filled me with so much fear and adrenaline that I ran faster than I ever had before. Once we made it back to the house, we all locked the doors and windows and stayed inside for the rest of the day. I don't know if we either lost it or whatever it was just gave up, but as we watched the woods from the kitchen, nothing ever came out. We never told our parents about that incident because we were all pretty worried about our parents yelling at us about it, and we never ended up coming across that thing again. But more weird things happened to us while in that house. We found an axe and a shovel, both pretty rusted and covered in dirt inside our fort, and none of us had ever put them there. So, who did? A few weeks later, both disappeared, just like they had appeared, without any trace or reason. Honestly, I have no words for it. My older sister also happened to have a couple of sleepwalking episodes while in that house, all of which ended with her waking up outside near or in the woods because we didn't keep our doors locked. We never found out who or what that person was, but honestly, I hope to never find out. Early one Friday afternoon in my sophomore year of college, my girlfriend Madeline's roommate Amy had the idea to gather all her new friends for a camping excursion near her hometown in upstate Vermont. She said she knew the area and had a couple of friends who lived close to the site. She said they were excellent and would be okay with us staying there, like it was on their property or something. Nobody actually knew Amy too well, but it sounded like a fun expedition. Around 20 people agreed to go. The location was about an hour from the college campus and none of us were familiar with the area at all. Some volunteered to drive as long as passengers contributed for gas or cigarettes or hooked them up with booze. People thought of this as a reasonable opportunity to get away from the campus with friends, and of course there were girls with alcohol. Of the 20 people who went, 7 were girls. 3 cars and 1 soccer mom van held us all, and it was a tight squeeze. En route to our destination, Amy asked us if we were all right with her friends bringing beer, because there wasn't going to be any place that sell it near us. So booze was purchased, the Natty Ice, Pabst, Coors, whatever you could think. It took us about 30 minutes to get to our site as we got off the highway. Only Amy knew how to get there, as the others followed shortly behind. We passed nothing but trees, with few houses in between, and no signs of human life anywhere. We traveled on the backcountry dirt roads with out-of-state license plates and 2 Vermont resident drivers. After finally reaching the campground, we noticed that there is only one way in and out. We also had no cell phone service, although that was not unusual in the Northeast. As we settled in, Amy met a car to hand-deliver beer for her friends, and they took off. She walked back to the site with us, and we started setting up tents, building a campfire, and we got our drink on. It's about 5 p.m. or so, and it slowly gets darker. Our site was about a half-mile away from where we entered. A scenic pond was behind our campfire, and Amy said the other side of it was in Canada. We all started drinking and relaxing and enjoying ourselves. About an hour into partying, we noticed 2 random guys. They looked college age, or mid-20s at least, walking towards our campfire. We assumed that they were Amy's friends as she gave them a beer. They continued to lurk at the site's edge but didn't talk to anyone, just stared. It made some people a little uncomfortable, and afterward, there was some talk about them. After finishing their beer, they left a few minutes and walked away from the site. Although I felt a little on edge after those dudes seemed to stake us out, we continued to party. After another hour or so, the rumbling of big engines, gunshots, horns blaring, and howling screams stopped us cold in our tracks. Coming down the only road to the site were the lights and silhouettes of several trucks. The trucks were speeding, with loud dual mufflers, large wheels, and headlights with fog lights, and more lights above their windshield, the kind made for big rigs. The trucks pull up and block the only way out. 4 trucks in total. There were so many of them, and their lights were all so bright and illuminating our party. One by one, guys get out of their seats, either from the truck's bed or inside. It looked like about 15 of them altogether. As they approached us, our party went silent, and all you could hear was the cackling of fire and the music playing from our van stereo. The ringleader had a cigarette in his mouth, a beer in one hand, and a shotgun. He stood about 20 feet in front of my friend Jack, stared at him and said, "This is our home turf. Do you know what we do here in Vermont? We kill idiots like you." The shotgun he had wasn't fully erected until he loaded it, cocked it, and shot it off with one hand into the sky. As the bullets buzzed a couple of feet above Jack's head, the group turned around and ran back to their trucks. They peeled out of there, one by one, slowly reversing out of there. We just sat there frozen. We had no real way to react. They were continuing to hoot and holler, shooting off more bullets in the sky, driving erratically and trashing the road with beer cans and tire marks. After they all left, people started packing and quickly getting ready to go. Amy did not know who some of them were and insisted our group stay, saying they would not return. Ordinary people leave after an episode like this, but Madeline wanted to stay, and it would be messed up if I didn't, I guess. Madeline was a Vermont beauty queen contestant, and I was trying to impress her, so I agreed to stay. The cars that left were packed. A Toyota Camry, which generally sits 3 in the back and 2 in the front, was fitting 4 in the back and including 3 people in the front. Also, 2 were in the passenger seat and managed to get a seatbelt on. My brother Evan was there and he begged me to get in the car, but I didn't listen, and they took off. With 8 of us left, 3 women, 5 men, with 1 car and a van, I knew it was not a good situation. And when my brother left, leaving me there in the woods with the others, I felt uneasy. I sobered up fast and decided to not drink anymore. I wish the others did the same, but they kept on partying. They took out the hard liquor next. As the others got deeper into the sauce, I stayed wary. I was the only sober person at that point. About 45 minutes after the initial incident, the sound of trucks again rumbling through the woods began. The trucks stopped further down the road from us and shut off their lights this time. We heard the unmistakable sound of a chainsaw, and we realized they had started to cut down trees and were blocking us in. We had fewer friends on the site, but they were more intoxicated than before. We were outnumbered. After hearing the chainsaw and crash of the trees, we all knew we were in trouble. Regardless of how high our BAC may have been, white underpants became brown, and some started panicking. My girlfriend's brother, Bruce, started sucking down straight liquor without a chaser and built up some liquid courage. He walked over towards the trucks. We didn't know what he was going to do. He had a big mouth and no filter, so I assumed it would not end well. We heard some commotion from the truck's direction and a lot of cursing. My girlfriend yelled at me to help her brother. I'm 6'2" and athletic, but not one to really pick fights. As I reluctantly walked towards the scene, I saw the tree cutting guy and his crew. I also saw Madeline's brother getting his ass beat. Punch after punch in the face, at least 2 different losers and a clan watching with alcohol in their hands. Meanwhile, in the background, the chainsaw continued revving. As I slowly approached the group, I could see that there were about 15 maniacs drinking, watching an innocent guy get beat up in a one-sided show. My instincts came into play and I pushed the guys who were punching him off of him and gave a swift left hook to one of their heads. The other pushed me back and I tripped over one of the trees they knocked down. The guy I punched went down and I assumed he was unconscious because he didn't get up very quickly. At this point, everything was in slow motion and I grabbed Bruce and helped him as we ran back to our cars. He was still disoriented from the couple of blows to the head and face he took. I yelled to all of my friends to get in the car and van. Meanwhile, I knew these guys would find me and rip me to shreds in the back of my head. At this point, I picked the closest automobile that was open and driver ready. It was the van, and unfortunately Madeline wasn't in it. Everyone jumped in the nearest car, rolled up the windows, locked the doors, and started the engines. I knew we weren't able to get the cars out of the location with the trees in the way of our path. Both vehicles drove toward the end of the road and stopped right in the way of our path. 2 girls and 3 guys were in the van, and 2 guys and Madeline were in one of the cars. The drunken clan started throwing sticks, rocks, beer cans, pounding on the glass windows with their hands, shouting and threatening that they would hurt us. Most of the people in the van were screaming, including my male roommate. They surrounded each car, and the shaking began. The van was swaying back and forth as we heard them laughing in the background. The car owner starts revving his engine, but they continue to push the car on both sides. The van was on 2 wheels, almost tipping over right at one point. After that, they fled off to their trucks, driving away screeching like wild animals, continuing to shoot off their guns in the air. This allowed us to get out of the car and attempt to move the trees so we could get the heck out of there. At least 2 trees were down and their girth was pretty significant. It took some work, but we could move them, and we did eventually, enough to get around them at least. We were too exhausted to lift them any further. We got the front 2 wheels around the trees and accelerated sufficiently to hop over one of the trees in the way. The car bottomed out, but it worked. It was the same thing with the van, but it was higher. I quickly jumped into the small car with Madeline, another friend, and Bruce. The other 3 were in the van. We all wanted to get out of there before the crew returned quickly. Bruce was driving and wanted nobody else to drive his car and swore he was okay to drive. We went left and I noticed the van went right. We were yelling at Bruce to follow the van, but he wanted to get out and was intoxicated and disoriented. He had a fast car and was picking up speed. After not even 5 minutes on the road, we passed a side street that intersects with the road that we were on, and a truck with headlights pulled up behind us. They put on their brights, including the extra fog lights, and started driving erratically behind us. They sped up when we sped up, with excessive honking. They try to get close to the car, but Bruce is swerving. You can hear gunshots from behind us. Either the passenger seat of that car was shooting at us, or the driver was. It was hard to tell. The driver picks up speed and comes to the left side of us, risking their lives and possibly going into oncoming traffic. Bruce gains control for a little bit, but eventually doesn't have time to see a left turn coming up, and we go off into the right side and off into the road into a small ditch. The car shuts off, and we can't start it. At this point, I'm scared for everybody's life, including my own. The truck slowly rolls behind our car. Everything is quiet, and I'm thinking the worst in my head. My friend in the back seat was a cancer survivor and was prepping and motivating herself to fight for their life. Our hearts reach maximum beats per minute, and I feel like they're gonna come out of our throats at any minute. Then, by some miracle, a random passer in an automobile at midnight, or whatever it was, sees this obnoxious truck in their lights, and then they see us in a ditch. They pull over and ask, "Is everything okay?" And we're yelling frantically, "No, call 911. The truck behind us is trying to hurt us." The truck and all the passengers get in their vehicle and peel out. The Good Samaritan waited with us until authorities arrived. He was our guardian angel, I'm sure of it. We see a local police car arrive as we flag him down. Unfortunately, he acted tough and told us to shut up and stay in the car. He cursed at us, which I thought was unprofessional, and interrogated us one by one. He was an aggressive, mean, rough, and around-the-edges guy that had no sympathy. He claimed that we were lying and he didn't want to hear what we had to say. He made us feel very uncomfortable when we were supposed to feel safe. About 10 minutes later, a state trooper and Canadian Border Patrol car pull up behind him. The local cop and state trooper instantly get into a heated argument like they were about to duke it out. They were fighting over whose jurisdiction the area was. It seemed so immature and ridiculous that they were both handling it this way. We were the victims here, and it felt as though this was not a reassuring thing to be seeing. All the authorities asked us were to take them to the campsite and show them where everything took place. Bruce tried the car again to see if it would start, and it did, and we were able to push it out of the ditch. Upon approaching the side road, the cop saw the trees that were cut down and had to park in front of them to walk into the campsite. We looked at where we had the fire set up in our tents, and they were all missing and everything was destroyed. We looked around to see where our possessions were, and they were floating deep in the pond. At this point, the Canadian border left as it wasn't their country. State and local cops took the statements and followed us to the main highway and made sure we were safe. We all decided to head back to campus and agreed to reach out to each other if we needed anything. My buddy, the cancer survivor, was petrified, and even though he had a single dorm room to himself, he wanted to stay in my dorm room. He slept on my floor for several weeks. The next day or so, our college organized a meeting for those involved to have a session to vent or talk about the episode. Counselors, security, and retired police attended and were there for support. In the end, we think the local cop was corrupt and was somehow related to the drunk crew. Although it was a traumatic experience for us, because there were no injuries or significant property damage, the cops didn't do anything. Amy denied setting us up, but the friendship was over at that point and we never talked to her again. Hello, Swamp Dweller. Thank you for giving me a platform on which to share this encounter anonymously. I'm a huge fan of your narrations, and your podcasts get me through every workday and long car rides. Keep up the excellent work and much love. For the sake of those involved, names and locations will be anonymous. I will refer to myself as M and the others as friends 1 through 6. The only location detail I will share is that this took place in Massachusetts. Now, on to the story. Almost a year ago, to get out of the house during quarantine, some friends and I wanted to go camping. 6 of us in total. We met up at a clearing that one of our friends knew about. Friends 1, 2, and 3, and I started getting everything set up while we still had some daylight. We got the tents and chairs set up around the fire pit before the sun was about to dip under the trees. After we got the fire going, it was around 8 p.m. A little after that, friend 2 got a call from friends 4 and 5 saying that they were running a bit late but were almost there, asking friend 2 to wait for them, out on the road, so they could see where we were. He left and everything was still excellent. A short time after, friends 2, 4, and 5 came back to the campsite. Friend 2 was a little shaken up. When we asked him about it, he said while he was waiting out on the road he felt like he was being watched and heard something in the trees. If you don't know Massachusetts, the forest and woodlands can be dense at times, and, at least in my area, there are a lot of pine trees, so flashlights or lanterns won't illuminate much more than a couple of feet in front of you. Yes, it is that thick in my area, with all the trees and fallen logs. Anyway, friend 2 said he was listening as whatever it was kept leaping back and forth to the trees behind him as he was walking. However, he suddenly heard it pacing back and forth in the trees behind him when he got to the road. Then, he didn't hear it anymore. The surrounding woods, he said, were very silent and still. He was down there for just a few minutes before he heard the pacing resume. Only this time it was across the road, and it was much faster than before. Now before I write this, I'll give some context. Friend 2 is a bit of a hothead with a short fuse when he gets annoyed. He said he yelled across the street that whoever was there better stop or he would go over there and kick their ass for toying with him. The pacing didn't stop. He said it got faster, even as he was about to cross the street. However, friends 4 and 5 showed up and the pacing stopped. And once they started hiking back, it was silent until they were about halfway to the campsite. At first, we all assured him that it was probably just a bobcat, if anything. As I said though, friend 2 was a little shaken up. And again, as I said, they have a bad temper and a big pair of stones most of the time. Normality resumed for a little bit after that. It wasn't until around 11 p.m. when I got a call from my mom asking me to come home for family reasons. I begrudgingly packed up and I left, and from there, I tell the story from the perspective of friend 4. Friend 4 told me about the day after that. Almost an hour after I left, the whole area felt dead silent. The only noises were the occasional smoldering of the campfire and some coyotes far off in the distance. They told me everyone started hearing the pacing off in the tree line about 30 to 40 feet away. They told me friend 1 was trying to keep everyone calm, saying it was just a deer or a bobcat and that it would go away after a little bit. Now, friends 2 and 3, who were a couple, started thinking about leaving as friend 3 said they were feeling uneasy. Now, some context. I have always been a night owl, to the point where it's become an inside joke in our group that I am an owl secretly, so I have the nickname Owl. Friend 4 said they tried to start making jokes about the others and how they were being. They said if I were there, I would have summoned an army of owls or something to dispatch whatever it was. However, as he said that, they said the thing pacing stopped, and then they heard it start to hoot. At first, it was like the sound you would make when teaching your child the sounds of animals, and slowly evolved it into a more accurate, full impersonation of an owl. As the hoots progressed, the pacing picked up again, but this time faster. And they said they also heard it breathing very heavily. And just like that, the howls of coyotes resumed, only much closer. They told me no more than 1,000 feet. Whatever it was kept howling louder and louder, and everyone began panicking. Even friend 1, who is an absolute adrenaline junkie who laughs at death as they go 80 freaking miles per hour on sharp corners with his motorcycle, was starting to be freaked out. Everyone was horrified. They didn't even bother packing much. They just took most of their valuables and whatever they could grab and ran to the car as fast as possible. Howling and barking coyotes not far behind. No hooting though. Just dead silent woods and howls and barks. Friends 1 and 5 will swear up and down that it was a bear or a bobcat or some sort of deer making the hooting noises, and that the coyotes were likely lost. However, friends 2, 3, and 4 told me that they had horrible, vivid nightmares that night. After our research, we concluded that the thing stalking us and mimicking an owl that night was most likely a wendigo, and the coyotes we decided were most likely drawn to the scent of a hunting predator and were looking to scavenge any remains they could. If you read this story and narrate it, thank you for choosing it. Stay safe if you're in the woods of Massachusetts. My friends like to tease me about this whenever I tell this story and say I'm exaggerating when I say that I felt pure evil from that place. The title was more of a warning based on personal experience, but I don't recommend it either way. I also apologize for the spotty detail between arriving and going into the house because I was young when this happened. Now, to get into it. I'm part of a Christian family who's pretty religious, and I was no exception. Ever since I was little, I was warned of anything witch-related, or anything deemed demonic, so I'm sure you can imagine the surprise and excitement a little 8-year-old me felt when my mom took me and my, at the time, 10-year-old brother to Salem to see the Witch Trials Museum. She thought that it would be a good, informative little trip for me and my brother. When we got there, we walked into the main building that had wax figures and voiceovers talking about the witch trials and showing different ways people were killed. They tried to get my brother, me, and the other small children to sit on a bit of a pentagram in the middle of the floor, but my mom yanked me next to her instead. I was honestly still stoked and invested in the history, even though the wax figure scared the crap out of me. Massachusetts, although had a dark history, it was very interesting. I've always been a big history nerd when it came to topics like this. My mom was a bit uneasy after that, but she was still happy that we enjoyed the day. We passed through a gift shop and had some lunch at a food place there. And then we heard that you could tour the judge's house, so we started to make our way over there. Now, my family has been susceptible to the paranormal and negative energies. I've had my own experiences outside of this. And not to mention, I had been excellent and happy out before this. During the walk there, the same goes for my mom and my brother. That was until we got to the house and walked in. An immediate feeling of dread, just a heaviness came over everybody. I'd never felt that way before, and I still never have since that day. I still can't put into accurate words the feeling that washed over me. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, and then had weights attached to my feet. There were other people in the house, and they seemed perfectly fine, but I felt like I was going to puke up my chicken tenders any minute. My mom, who had let me have a few feet of freedom, was ushering my brother outside the house because he felt sick and on the verge of tears. I was still following the group, but I nearly fainted when we started going up those stairs to the judge's bedroom. It felt like an invisible boulder was on my back, and the voice in my head was screaming for me to get out of there and leave. I finally made it to the top of the stairs after practically tripping up them, and thank God my mom was there to steady me because I damn near fell. It felt as if all the negative energy in that whole place had decided to plop itself in that tiny bedroom and glare into my soul with all of its hatred. She nearly dragged me out of that house because I was lethargic and near hysterics. As I stepped foot out of that house, my head started to clear and I felt nausea subside. We left right then, and when we got into the car, we prayed for at least 5 minutes straight. It wasn't until a few years ago that I asked my mom about that place and if she knew why it had affected my brother like that and me. She admitted that it also affected her in the same way, and her focus was to get my brother and me out of there. Recently, I brought it up again with my mother, and she told me something else that I did not know. There was a heavy negative energy in our house when we got home for a few weeks after. My Catholic grandmother, who didn't think we went until after this, came down to visit and said she heard steps on the stairs when no one was home. It just felt like this awful, heavy presence was in our house. I don't know how long this lasted as my mom didn't really specify, and I was too young to really remember. I don't remember much after leaving the museum, and I don't think they're lying. My theory on why this all happened was because an evil man died in that house. I think either his spirit is still there, or maybe my family could sense the pure evil, or he had just left all his negative energy there when he died. I don't know if it was because he was religious or we were religious, but whatever it was, that house did not want my family there. You can choose to believe me or not, but I know what I felt and experienced, and it was something I'd wish not on my worst enemy. Salem, Massachusetts has some truly scary things lurking within it. My name is Linda, and I used to be a hippie. Well, I still am a hippie, I suppose. But back in the day, I used to be a real hippie. The kind that packed up their belongings and took a trip on the magic bus out to India at 18. I spent the years after that doing a lot of hitchhiking all over Europe and the Middle East. Back when it was relatively safe, if you can believe that. So naturally, I have a lot of affection for hitchhikers and those who are generous enough to give them a ride. And I never failed to stop for those with their thumbs out. This led me to pick up a hitchhiker on a Massachusetts highway one night, which I would later regret very much. So as I said, I was cruising out of Boston one evening. I was heading back towards Salem, probably the hippiest place in all of Massachusetts, and where I currently call home. On the side of the highway, there was this tall man in a long black coat holding out a thumb. I slowed to a stop, called out a friendly greeting from an open window, and then invited him in to ask where he was headed. He told me Maine, but he'd be grateful for as far as I could take him, even if that were only towards Salem. It was then I noticed the bag he had with him. It was one of those leather bowling bags, the semicircular kind with two thin straps. It was not unusual on its own, but the way he held it a little too tightly did attract my attention. But those delicate observations were soon overcome by the outrageous smell that seemed to come off the guy. He reeked of something rotten, and I was quickly glad that I had only promised to take him as far as Salem. I'm not one to judge. I'd met plenty of unwashed travelers back in my heyday, but holy crap, I think he saw the look on my face or the wrinkling of my nose and opted to say something. He told me he was sorry about the smell, that he had been on the road for a few days and didn't have enough money to pay for a motel room or anywhere else to get washed for that matter. I told him not to worry, that I had been in a similar situation myself, and it wasn't anything an open window couldn't remedy. But even with the cracked driver's window, the stench persisted until I'd pretty much resigned myself to mouth breathing for the rest of the short journey. At one point, I got pretty concerned about the man's well-being. Certain infections, such as gangrene, can cause hideous odors as they rot away whatever flesh it has purchased. If he was a drug user, and he had picked up something like that from sharing needles, he had to be in some sort of pain. But when I threw out a vague question inquiring about his health, he seemed confused. He told me he was in picture-perfect health, how maybe he could do with putting on a few pounds, but other than that, he was peachy keen. I was almost sure I'd seen him limping a little as he climbed into the passenger side, but I still decided not to press the issue. Offending your passenger does not make for a pleasant journey. Anyway, we arrived in Salem, and as much as I tried not to show it, I was over the moon that we were parting ways. But the rotten smell seemed to cling to the car's upholstery, no matter how much Febreze I pumped in there, and I spent most of that evening scrubbing the passenger side with a mix of disinfectant and hand soap. It was the first time I'd ever actually felt regret about picking up a hitchhiker, and it was profoundly confusing for me. I hated feeling like a Grinch who was angry she'd been generous enough to help another human being. But all of those emotions paled in comparison to the following day when I told my partner what had happened the previous evening. I knew something was wrong the moment I mentioned picking up a hitchhiker. My partner gave me this look that I'd only ever seen once or twice throughout our entire relationship. It was one of pure fear. I asked her why she was looking at me like that, what she knew that I didn't. All she did was flick through a newspaper she was reading over breakfast, pointing out a particular article that consisted of no more than 1 or 2 paragraphs. It detailed the story of a prisoner escape in New York State, how a tall, boyish prisoner had managed to slip through the cracks thanks to some sort of paroling error. New York State troopers had urged public members to watch out for a tall, thin man who walked with a limp. The article said that the prisoner was most likely headed up to the Canadian border in a bid to escape justice. I had given that prisoner a ride. My partner immediately called the cops, and I called into work telling them I might be a little bit late. A pair of uniformed officers arrived at our home with lightning speed, desperate to write down as many details as I could remember. What he was wearing, what he was carrying, where I had dropped him off, where he was going, if he said anything like that, etc. I could only answer so many of their questions, but I had a few of my own too. I told them about the terrible smell, the stench that clung to my upholstery that was likely still lingering. I wanted to know what could make a man smell that terrible, if he had some sort of disease that he had not mentioned. Honestly, I was terrified that if he did, it would be contagious. After all, I'd spent the better part of an hour in the car with this guy. They told me no, that he wasn't sick, but they could explain the smell, although it might be something that I did not want to know. I told them of course I wanted to know what it was. I'd been in the car with a murderer and lived to tell the tale. It was with this horrible look in the officer's eyes that he told me that a rotten smell could be explained away because he had escaped to visit someone in Buffalo, New York before he made it into Massachusetts. Someone he had taken a trophy from. Their bloody, severed head was in that bag he was carrying. When I think back on my childhood, I remember that I used to have awful night terrors. This is a true scary story about one of what I feel to be the scariest ones I ever had. I used to live in a 2nd-floor apartment in a house in the residential neighborhood of a part of Massachusetts called Dorchester. I didn't live too far from the train, which was about a good 10 to 20 minute walk from my house up to Boston Street Bridge. And there were 2 sub shops that you could get great sandwiches from. But anyway, that's not why I'm here writing this. Up until I was about 10 or 11, I, as I said at the beginning, used to have awful night terrors. So this one night wasn't any different from any of the other nights where I would wake up screaming and crying and fighting with absolutely nothing until my mother would come in and sing Adele Vise to me. It was a dark and rainy night. It was a little darker than usual, I thought. On the door to my bedroom, I had one of those plastic coat hangers that go over the top of your door. I had all my coats and hoodies on that. So on this stormy night, I'd woken up to the sound of thunder crashing and laying there staring at the stuff. Still this time, I didn't see coats and hoodies. I saw the shadowy figure that looked like he was standing over me, watching me, To be sure I wasn't losing my mind, I slipped out of bed and passed the figure in question. I then made my way to the short hallway past the front door and stopped and stood right at the bathroom door staring at the bathtub, almost positive that someone or something was in the tub waiting for me to come closer so it could grab me. I backed up into my parents' bedroom, and as I turned around and looked, they were dead. Not only dead, but they were skeletons. This also terrified me, like you wouldn't believe. As I stood there in front of my mom freaking out, she woke up and tried to calm me down, the way she always had. I crawled up next to her, and she began to sing Adele Vise. I know this might not be a typical scary story you share, but for whatever reason it's always stood out to me, and I always thought it was interesting that maybe you could share some sort of nightmare horror stories. I was having a conversation about urban legends with my boyfriend and his friend who was in town who happens to be a stand-up comedian. The topic came up of, no, I actually know someone that happened to. So here's my story. Back around 2003, I worked in a clothing store known for inexpensive t-shirts at a mall in a smaller northern city in central Massachusetts. I am a bit of a taller woman, just a hair shy of 5'11", with small, medium hourglass frame, light hair, light eyes. I was 18 when this happened. My friend that I worked with met up with me to pick up our checks and schedules and shop a little bit. She's no joke, 4'11", and still looks like she's 12, even though she's now in her 30s. We were both active in the hardcore scene at the time, but I looked a little more clean cut than her. She liked piercings, I liked tattoos. We were parting ways since we parked in the same lot but in different sections. I gave her a hug and walked away. I heard someone call, "Miss," and I turned around. It was a short, fat guy with a bottle in his hand coming towards me. "Miss, I got my wife this perfume. Will you smell it for me? Tell me if it's good." Nope, frick off. I kept walking to my car, taking my Nokia out to call Jackie as I walked over. The dude persisted and started hitting notes of agitation in his voice, following me all the while, increasing the speed of his pace, saying he just needed me to smell it. Jackie answered, "Some guy's following me, drive down my road please." He heard me on the phone and stopped following me immediately. Jackie drove up alongside me and moments later described the guy, asking if it was him, which I confirmed. "He got into some van and drove away," she said. In hindsight, we should have called the cops. But information on human trafficking and kidnapping in 2003 wasn't what it is now. Instead, we just went with the running joke that I was worth more on the black market than she was because of the facial piercings. So when you saw that email chain forward going around about men chloroforming young women and trying to sell them on the black market, I hope you actually paid attention. It almost happened to me. Route 26 Nightmare by Thomas M. Dear Swamp Dweller, the following story took place in July of 1994. I was about 16 years old and had just gotten my driver's license earlier that year. With that, I had a newfound freedom I had never experienced before, and I drove all over New Hampshire and Maine. One night, I was going home from a friend's house. He had moved with his family to the small town of Oxford, Maine. That night's weather was stormy, with lightning bolts and heavy rain. I was driving along Route 26 toward Gray, Maine, when I saw a woman standing in the middle of the road. She was wearing all white and seemed to be somewhat dazed. I stopped the truck and called out to her, "Hey ma'am, you all right? You need a lift somewhere?" She walked up to my passenger side and let herself in without so much as a whisper. Her clothes were torn, and she was soaking wet, unsurprising given the weather. I inquired about getting her the police or possibly a doctor. She turned slowly to me and said,
"I need to go home. My mother's waiting."
I asked where she lived, and she told me that she lived in Porter, Maine. I smiled and said, "You're in luck. Driving home to freedom, it's on my way." She produced the slightest hint of a smile and said the address. I put the truck in gear and started to drive home. As I was driving, I started to think of the address she had given me. I knew Porter fairly well and didn't remember a house on that particular road she had mentioned. However, I kept that to myself, thinking I was mistaken. The rain was coming down so hard that I was creeping along. We were only going about 15 miles per hour, and were probably just a few miles from Porter, and she hadn't said very much. I offered them a cigarette, and she accepted. I went to grab some, and suddenly she looked at me and said,
Thank you for your kindness.
I looked back at her and dropped the box on the truck floor. You're very welcome, I said while picking up the bag and taking my eyes off the road just for a millisecond. I turned back to realize I was completely alone. I slammed the brakes and came to a screeching halt, sitting on the side of the dark road in shock. I lit up a smoke and calmed myself down. When I had regained my composure, I put the truck in drive and was about to drive off when I noticed something. The small bridge on the lonely back road I was on was gone. A massive tree had taken it out during the storm. I reported it on my CB radio on the emergency channel and they closed the road. Years later, I heard the ghost of Route 26 had been seen by many others and had on occasion diverted people from untimely tragedy. Regardless of what I saw or picked up, I must thank them for saving my life. Maine Hunting Experience by Ben C. I had never been a massive believer in the supernatural, but I'm not closed-minded either. I had never had an experience of my own. That is, until one night in early December of 2016. I was 16 years old at the time and was doing what I loved best, hunting with my father and grandfather. I have been an avid hunter since my dad bought me my first hunting license when I was 7 years old. Throughout my life, I have hunted all kinds of game, from pheasant to turkey, bears and foxes to deer and elk. So it's safe to say I'm fairly familiar with wildlife all over the United States. This particular encounter took place on my grandparents' property in southern Maine. They owned 55 acres of land with a small river running through the property's southwest corner. However, that river is a mud pit at this time of year. For a little more detail, the land's topography is very hilly with steep inclines and deep valleys. The plan for the evening hunt was supposed to be a short one and was only supposed to take 2 to 3 hours. My dad and grandpa were supposed to come from opposite sides of the valley, and I would come down the hill and we would all meet at the halfway point in the valley and walk out together. The valley was elementary to find as it was an old logging road and well marked. The idea was to push deer to each other. We had a late start, so only 2.5 hours or so of daylight left when I started my solo track into the valley. Before I started my hunt, I pulled out my phone and looked at the property map. I know I should be able to walk down the hill without much navigation, but I fear I'll take a wrong turn and get lost. What scares me the most is pissing off my grandpa for making him wait at the rendezvous point, so I looked at the map to be safe. The first part of the hunt started off without a hitch. I was making good time while stopping every once in a while to look for deer signs. So far there was nothing worth mentioning, but I was happy to be in the woods regardless. Things, however, became terrible quite quickly. As I mentioned, there wasn't much daylight left, so we considered that. Unfortunately, we didn't feel the storm that came in like a bat out of hell with no warning. In an instant, the sky became dark as night and the snow came down where seeing more than 5 feet in front of you was damn near impossible. I had enough and began to haul ass to the meeting point at the bottom of the hill. Once I finally reached the level ground, a wave of relief fell over me. I was cold and wet and wanted a shower. Then my heart sank. I was off the old logging road. I still needed to figure out where I was. Everything I knew about making out of situations like this tells me to stay calm and forget about everything. But I am everything but calm. I knew I was down the hill, so I had to hope that my dad or grandpa was somewhere close by. Not even thinking about scaring any nearby deer, I yell out, "Dad! Grandpa!" I took a momentary pause to listen for a response. All I heard was the wind blowing through the valley and the sound of snowfall. Then I heard something I honestly cannot explain. I heard, "Dad! Grandpa!" echoed back to me, but wrong. What the hell? "Over here!" I yelled back, only to have the same, "Over here!" yell back to me. This time it was close, really close. Whatever was echoing me was moving fast. To hell with this. I pulled out my phone to call my dad or figure out where I was. But of course, it was dead. The only thing I was sure of was that I did not want to be in those woods any longer. I figured that if I walked in one direction long enough, I would eventually end up at a house or a road. I must have been walking for close to a half an hour with no sign of anything but more woods. The whole way, I had an uneasy feeling. It was like something was there, but it wasn't watching me. It was stalking me. Every time I paused to get my bearings, I could hear the snow crunching under the footsteps. When I had finally had enough, I called out, "Who's there?" But there was nothing but the sound of footsteps circling me. Then I remembered them stopping. I was able to pinpoint where the steps stopped. It was dead ahead of me. I looked out into the woods, and behind a large hemlock I noticed something duck behind the tree. It was quick, so that I couldn't make out many details. But whatever it was tall and skinny enough to hide behind a tree without being seen. By this point, I was determining my next move. I wasn't too afraid to move forward to the hemlock, and I had no interest in finding out whatever creature was hiding only a few feet away from me. I raised my rifle and pulled back the firing pin. I fired around into the tree, and almost instantly I heard the thing take off at warp speed. Thinking I got rid of this thing, I continued walking in the same direction. I thought if I could get to a road, my dad and grandpa would be looking for me. So I carried on, and so did the storm. After another hour or so, I finally stumbled onto a paved street with no other issues. I had to figure out how to contact my dad so they could pick me up. That is when I heard it again. "Dad! Grandpa!" The thing had still been stalking me. I fired another round into the air, but it had no effect. The creature kept yelling back at me, and it was getting closer and closer. Once it sounded almost on top of me, it went dead silent. I looked around and heard a welcoming sound. It was my dad's truck coming down the road. Thank God. I piled in and began to tell my dad and grandpa everything. When my dad started to drive off, I looked behind me, and through the red glow of the taillight, I saw a tall figure ducked behind another tree. I, to this day, have never figured out what was stalking me in those woods. If anyone has any idea to what I encountered, I'm all ears. A Not So Jolly Christmas by Anonymous. I've been dreading sharing this story as the memories are hard to relive. My family and I were involved in a shooting. It was December 20th, 1993, in Berwick, Maine, where these events began. They lasted until about the 21st or 22nd, however. I was 14 when this happened, and my father was no longer really in my family's or my life. To give you an idea of the layout where we lived, before you walk into our apartment, you have to go into a room with a staircase that leads up. Our door is the last one on the right when you're facing the front entrance. When you first enter our apartment, you will start in the living room, followed by the kitchen. To the left is the bathroom, and through a doorway past the kitchen is my brother's room. Through my brother's room and another doorway is my room, while in the back of my room, to the left is the back exit of the apartment itself. Now that I've got this setup out of the way, I'll explain the story itself. It was Christmas break, and it had been snowing rather heavily. We had just finished having my brother's birthday party, and as such, there was my mom, 3 brothers, and myself, and our neighbor's son, whom we'll call Johnny. Johnny and I were the same age, went to the same school, and he had a crush on me. All the kids were in my brother's room working on a puzzle when I wanted to ask my mom a question. She was in the living room. I should also add there's a window above the kitchen sink which will be necessary, and I headed in before asking my mom something. I soon noticed a sound as I walked by the kitchen, but I ignored it. I soon head back to my brother's room when I hear the noise again. I turned to my mom and asked her if she also heard the noise. She confirmed, and she had, and me being dumb and 14 years old at the time, I wanted to see if it happened again if I walked by the kitchen window. I walked by and again we heard the noise. Curious, I asked my mom what she thought the sound was. She told me it was probably just kids playing with some firecrackers. She asked me what I thought it was, and I told her I had no clue. I then shrugged and kept going towards my brother's room, at which point I heard the firecracker sound off several more times. I turned back and asked my mom if she still thought it was firecrackers, as I thought it sounded more like a gun. She told me whoever was making the noise was going too far with it, and she had to go to her friends to use their phones to call the police. I was instructed to not open the door for anyone but her, but I knew it was her because she'd knocked twice to signal me. At this point, she locked the door behind her and headed to her friend's house. My brothers must have known something was wrong because they had been worried. They had looks on their face that really showed that they were kind of scared. I instructed them to crawl to the bathroom, and once I grabbed my 1-year-old brother, I joined them, locking the door behind me. I figured things would be safer this way, as there was only one tiny window that no adult would fit through. But if we needed to, we could. We stayed quiet and listened outside. It had only been about a minute when I heard several more popping sounds. My brothers began crying, and I'll admit, although I kept a brave face, I was terrified. I couldn't shake that thought of my mom being out there, and was worried that she could have been shot or worse. Worried about my mother, I handed my little brother to Johnny and said I'd check on my mom. I peeked through the windows of the kitchen and didn't see my mom, which led me to believe I might have overreacted about the entire situation. Just as I was about to calm down, I heard a knocking at the door, which made me jump. Johnny gave me a look as though asking what we should do, but I wasn't really sure what to do. The knocking continued, and I knew it wasn't my mom. Johnny came out and stood next to me, and another knock came at the door. Johnny finally asked who it was, at which point a deep male voice said,
"It's me."
Johnny, unsure of who it was, asked him who the hell was me. The voice then said it was Kevin. I turned to Johnny and said it was okay, as Kevin was my stepdad. Johnny opened the door, and Kevin asked if we had heard the popping sounds. We said yes before Kevin told us to go with him to their place until my mom returned. We agreed, and just as I was about to leave, I saw my mom's friend Bear out in the street. Assuming that was okay, I told Johnny to go with my brothers and rushed to meet Bear. I asked Bear if he had seen my mom, and he had said she was on the phone with the police. I hugged Bear before standing slightly to his left, at which point I noticed he was eyeing a house near the garage. What happened next gave me absolute nightmares, and I still dream about it to this day. I heard the sound of a gun, and Bear grabbed my right arm. Then I heard another sound and blood splattered on me. Bear told me to run as fast as possible as he fell to the ground screaming in pain. He'd been shot in the left cheek. I ran and busted through Johnny's door, crying, shaking, and hyperventilating. I'm asthmatic. As I fell to my knees crying, this is when I met Wendy, who would become my first best friend. She asked me who I was before I started screaming and telling her about my neighbor Bear getting shot in the face. Wendy hung up the phone she was on, and her parents came into the room. Everything after this was a bit hazy on the account of me being in shock and traumatized from witnessing someone get shot in front of me. Wendy took me upstairs to change clothes, and I was trying to say something, but I just couldn't get it out. My mom showed up at the neighbors before bringing us home, but I don't remember when or how. I remember my brother, whose birthday it was, throwing up in the toilet in our apartment. The paramedics tried to get us at one point, but they couldn't because the shooter was shooting everything that moved. I was rocking back and forth, staring into a mirror, shocked when I noticed a man in the mirror. The man looked to be in his 40s, somewhat heavyset, messy hair down to his ears, brown eyes, and appeared unshaven. We were in the bathroom for hours. I'm not sure how many, but the police kept calling, which is how my mom found out the ambulance couldn't get to us. I also heard they had reached Bear and he was alive but in critical condition. This calmed me somewhat because he was alive, but I was still afraid he might not make it. It was quite suddenly when the door was suddenly smashed in, terrifying all of us. It turned out to be SWAT. Although afraid, I began feeling safer, knowing it was all finally over. We all eventually snuck to my bedroom before the gunman started firing again. The police kept us safe, but again we were pinned for hours. At some point the sun came up. I had no concept of time at this point, as I was very shocked. Trauma makes everything feel like a dream. It's the best way I can describe it to anyone who has ever been in a situation where they are traumatized, and it isn't something you can truly understand if you've never been in the case. It's a defense mechanism of the brain, but it can lead to PTSD among other things. My mind had checked out at this point and only snapped again when I watched a tree shatter when a bullet flew through it. Part of me didn't want to believe this, and part of me pondered on how many guns the gunman had. My family was scared, and I was as well, though my mind wasn't fully processing it. I held my 1-year-old brother, singing to him and reassuring him it'd be fine, and we wouldn't let anything happen to him. Eventually, my brother drifted off to sleep, and sometime after, I'm not sure how long, the police told us they would be moving us to Town Hall, which was close to our apartment. The cops informed us to stick close to vehicles and them. They said to keep low and move. After some time, it was finally time to go. The movement we all had was in unison with the police. The gunman soon opened fire on us. I remember the police firing back and the sound of bullets whizzing by from the police and the gunman. I remember being terrified and numb all at once. At one point we got behind some vehicles and bullets ricocheted all around us. We heard one hit the top of a tire and pop it. As we approached Town Hall, I saw news reporters and people looking afraid all around us. I forgot about the blanket the police had put around me before leaving our home and tripped over it in the chaos. I didn't get up immediately and remember people freaking out, thinking I had been shot. The truth was I was embarrassed by tripping, and I'd hit my head pretty hard on the fall down. A police officer eventually picked me up and began running. We ultimately were cornered by the media, who talked to my mom and myself, and it was a little overwhelming, but I remember feeling some semblance of safety again. We made it to the paramedics, and I remember someone of some importance reassuring us we were safe. It could have been the mayor, and he was dressed sharply enough to be one. Once we arrived at the SIP, or the shelter in place, they had gym mats out and some pizza. After we attempted to play and try to make some normalcy out of the rest of the hours, we eventually settled down and tried to sleep. My sleep, of course, was not uninterrupted as I woke up any time I heard gunfire, but once the gunfire lessened and eventually stopped altogether, I felt an array of feelings and exhaustion overcame me. We were finally, truly safe. I cried myself to sleep until the nightmare woke me up when we all eventually went home again. There was a heaviness in the air when we finally returned to our apartment. We hadn't fully processed everything we went through yet. The apartment never really felt the same after that day. I remember being irrationally angry when I went back to my room. It was a mess, the door had been kicked off the hinges and never shut right after that. Even when it was fixed, it just never really closed. My curtains were destroyed and everything was trashed. I found out later that the police had used my room as a staging ground. Bear, thankfully, made a full recovery from his injuries. Well, the physical ones anyway. I found out years later that he was never the same after being shot in the face. And then again, I'm still not the same myself and I wasn't even shot. I don't blame Bear one bit for being messed up. Remember the man in the mirror I mentioned earlier? I described him to Wendy and she explained I had told the shooter to the finest of details. I don't recall seeing the shooter, but perhaps I did see him. The mind will do strange things while you're in shock. When the break was over and we returned to school, the kids kept asking us about what had happened. We couldn't deal with it and I went to the office and called my mom and left. The school told us to take as much time as we needed, and we took a few months off. When the information eventually came out, it turned out that our neighbor across the street was the shooter. His name was Patrick Wood. He was ex-military, and the police had thrown tear gas. Later on, they realized he hadn't left because he had a gas mask on. Inside his home, they found tons of weapons and ammunition. He had dug a tunnel from his house to his shed where his guns were, and he'd used that to restock and reload when he was entirely out of ammunition. The man also had several medications strewn all over the place. When I was with Bear, I heard a whirring sound on the first bullet. It turned out that that sound was the shot narrowly missing my head. I'm lucky to be alive to share this story with you today. Patrick was terminally ill with cancer and his wife left with their kids. I'd imagined that's why he did what he did. I passed no judgment on his wife. It's not her fault. He snapped, not her. I believed she had good reasons for leaving with their kids. I mean, look what he did. It's going to sound crazy, but please hear me out when I say I empathize with Patrick in a way. He had lost everything, and if I was placed in his shoes, while I probably wouldn't have done what he did, I do kind of see his perspective, even though it's completely terrible. Some part of me feels that if that guy wanted me dead, he wouldn't have missed that headshot. I don't know. I don't think he wanted me dead, but I can only speculate because obviously I'm here to live. It's only speculation and we'll never know as, he was shot dead in the end. Patrick was amazingly the only person to die during the shooting. I guess I do feel bad he died in the end, but since these traumatic events, I never feel safe anywhere. Any loud popping or sudden sound makes me panic, and sometimes I'll get cold sweats and start hyperventilating just from being around too many people. I've had several years of therapy, but it's never going to be wholly solved. Tall Dark Figures by Anonymous. When I was around 7 years old, I moved to Connecticut with my mom and my family. There were 6 of us total, into a big house. One day, while I was in my new room by myself, I looked over to see the door slowly closing. I just moved in, and now something is happening. Around 2 years later, I was over at my friend's house, who I'll call Katie for the story's sake. Katie was a good friend of mine, and we had always gotten along. When she was outside and I was playing with her younger brother, Katie has 2 younger siblings, a brother and a sister. Then out of the corner of my eye, I see inside the house that Katie's sister is walking by, with a tall, dark figure looming after her. I rushed to the door and swung it open to see Katie's sister walking out of the room, but just as I suspected, no one was even there, just Katie's sister. I was confused but not too alarmed. I mean, it was my imagination, right? Well, I guess I'd be wrong. 2 years after that incident, I was over at my other friend Andrew's house. Katie and Andrew were hanging out in his basement, talking and listening to music. It was about 6 p.m. when Andrew's mom yelled that the pizza had arrived. This was somewhat of a sleepover. Andrew ran up the stairs followed by Katie, and then I was last. Turned to my left to see a hand sticking out of a doorway off in Andrew's basement. But Katie, Andrew, and I were the only ones in the basement. I yelled at Katie to run up the stairs, and Andrew wondered why I was so terrified. Once back in the basement, I told them what had happened. We tried communicating with the spirit, and I felt something hard smack the back of my head. It's easy to say that we didn't sleep much that night. Andrew claims that his house is haunted since he felt someone's hand on his back with no one around, which could explain the hand we saw, but I'm not sure if anyone would believe us. Other things have occurred to me, but this is one of the scariest ones that I can share currently. Church Group Killer by Hopper Sir. The year is somewhere in the early 2000s. My mother lives in the foothills of Connecticut, a little suburban town in the River Valley. Little does she know that one night something awful has taken place off the road known as Iron Horse Boulevard. The thing about Iron Horse is the fact that it has a well-lit path that runs alongside it for runners and bikers alike. I have biked and walked with friends after school there before. I still live in the same town, so that you know, but after this incident, I refuse to go down there at night ever again. Let me explain. So a few years ago, a woman, a name I do not know, was running late at night on a well-lit path. She was jogging alone, a single woman living a happy life with a well-paying job for a tri-state insurance giant. No enemies, no ex-lovers, but a scream was heard. A couple of men are driving down the main road when a bloody body crawls up the Iron Horse. It's the runner. She had been stabbed, possibly multiple times, by an unknown individual in the night, either by an axe or a butcher knife. The police searched for some time. They suspected her boyfriend, who was at a pub a couple of miles away, yet I think he eventually was proven innocent. He wanted the killer caught, and the police did too. Yet, that's where the case goes cold. This person had committed a horrible crime and gotten away with it in our small suburbia. Fast forward to when I was probably in the 7th grade. This was about 15 years after the incident. It was something that haunted my mind since we had only just moved to this town. We had always been quite nomadic, living in places like New Haven to Barkhamsted, all around Connecticut, and now we ended up here as my mom's job was always making us move. We were in a small family-owned church group run by some friends. One day, and we went to my mom's best friend's house at night for a group session. As the 7th grader I was, I had my 3DS or whatever was out at the time, and wasn't paying much attention. But this guy, whom we'll call Derek, seemed remarkable. Derek was in his late 20s and maybe early 30s. He gave me a wave, and I sat down next to him. He was on his phone playing Angry Birds or some mobile game. But something felt off. Whenever the Bible or anything religious was brought up, he would always seem to fall asleep. Of course, everyone figured he was tired from working his late-night shift at a grocery store a town over, so we didn't really bother waking him. Only as I was leaving did I overhear the pastor.
Demons and the enemy usually make someone fall asleep when the Bible is mentioned, as they don't want what they possess to hear the word of the Lord.
My mom brought this up to me recently, and it is indeed something that people say is true. Mom and I saw Derek at the grocery store a bit later that week. He seemed normal besides his fascination with the knife section, always fixing it up and making it look nice, despite being a cashier. He checks us out, says hey, and we go on our way. He's nice. When will he be at our next church group? I asked my mom, who looks ahead and shakes her head. Derek stopped coming for a while now. Fast forward again a year or two. Derek and his friend, we'll call her Jen, a timid girl yet very polite, were hiking in their wildlife refuge near the town. They were having fun, although Jen noted that Derek seemed to be a bit off. He was nervous, shaking even, Jen said. They get to the middle of the woods when Derek takes off his hat and says, "I have a confession to make, Jen. To you. Just for you." Jen turns around and faces him. "Yes, Derek?" Derek turns pale and his face goes from stuttering to stone cold.
"I killed her, Jen."
Who? Who did you kill?"
"That lady, on Iron Horse all those years ago. It was me, I needed to do it. No woman moved me."
"What? You didn't even know her?" Jen was perplexed and started walking faster, with Derek keeping up as they began returning to the car.
"I know, but no woman loved me. I needed to take out my anger. But I trust you, Jen. I love you. You're the one. We'll be together forever. You're mine."
Jen turns and faces him to tell him he must confess to the church group's pastor that day, and the police won't be called. They head over and surprisingly, Derek confesses. Obviously, the police were called and Derek was put into jail. His reason for killing her in cold blood was that no woman loved him. He was a quote-unquote incel, as my mom puts it now. He was so angry he couldn't do it with any woman that he killed one. This made me mad. I wanted him to get a life sentence. I was angry at this man. This calm man who wore glasses, slept all the time, and worked his way into our lives was the Iron Horse Killer. I'm a junior in high school now, and I still think hearing about this story and all the wacky and surprisingly evil things that most normal people do turn me off from dating. Despite me being male, I'm just scared that anybody could be a psycho killer just like he turned out to be. The worst part about this story is that Derek never stopped sending letters to Jen from jail. He wanted her to be his forever. She was his one and only, and Derek was truly insane. Whether that be from the rumors of his dad doing devil worship or his anger issues, stay away. Go back to the hole you climbed out of. If you're on the internet researching this story and think it would be wise to reach out to talk to this person, I really don't think you should. The world will see the truth of this small town in Connecticut, and what he did. The Devil's House by Anonymous. Hopefully, some people listening to this story may know more about this place than I do. I tried to research it, but I can't get much of anything to pop up on the old Google machine. A little over a decade ago, I met and started dating a girl who lived in Tolland County, Connecticut. So I hauled my way up from down south for a visit. I know it's a bad idea to cross, many in this case, state lines for a relationship, but this was my early 20s, and I still thought I knew everything and that it would turn out differently for me. Spoiler, it didn't. Here in the South, we think of big cities and industries up north. I was honestly surprised when I got to her place and it was just trees, rolling hills, and even the distant mooing of cows. Now, I can't exactly say why, but despite all this familiar terrain, something inherently felt different about it all. This isn't something I can outright put into words, but there was something that enchanted me about the northern wilderness. I had to drink in as much as I could of it. I spent a lot of time dragging her through the brush. We explored some abandoned mills, found an odd ring of chairs in a clearing, and generally frolicked and had good summer journeys. Except for this one place we found. I don't know what it was. Maybe an old theater or roller skate rink. All I can remember is that it was painted black and had these murals of outer space scenes like flaming comets and ringed planets on the outside. Everything about the place seemed to scream the 1970s, but I might be wrong. Now, I'm a seasoned explorer of abandoned buildings. I've been into many so-called haunted houses and all kinds of historical places that urbex explorers just have to put on their bucket list. I'm used to the strange and sometimes even scary. Personally, I don't think you can live in the country and not have a tale or two. That doesn't quite add up. This place bugged me though. It wasn't stereotypical like a cold feeling or an intense dread. It was more of like a feeling that something was just downright wrong. It felt out of place, and though it seems like it was just sort of a place I'd love to explore, it's to date the only area I have ever turned down. Here's the thing. I wanted to go in. I wish I had, but I simply could not try. Something about that feeling was so foreign and off that I literally could not compel myself to do anything but turn back. And that's just what I did. Maybe someone up here might know what this place was. I have tried digging it up and researching every few years, but I never get much of anything. The girl and I didn't last much longer after that, and I don't think she knew what it had been or what happened there anyway. As I said before, this was in the Tolland County area. Still, I also heard a saying from a bunch of folk up there: go about 30 minutes in any direction and you'll be in another state. So it's possible that the place was not even in the county, but it wasn't too far away. Does anyone know what this place was, or perhaps why it felt so unnatural? Footsteps in the Woods by Anonymous. My aunt has owned a large piece of land, over 100 acres, in northwest Connecticut for many years now. Her property is primarily uninhabited in a state park and only frequented by backpackers. Her land is well off any main roads, and we must drive through many forests to reach her house. She bought the land and remodeled the old house that was already built on it, so that it was more livable, and visiting her has always been my favorite thing to do. I have been going yearly since I was a baby and have spent countless hours exploring the woods, creeks, and land around the house. We call it the farm, although it's not actually anything agriculture and there's no livestock. My aunt has rescued miniature horses, alpacas, and donkeys in the past, but there's nothing really like that there now. I think there might be some ducks. The animals are on one part of the property anyway, where all the area has been cleaned out so they could graze, get fat, and be happy. The rest of the farm is untouched woodland. In the early 2000s, she installed a 12-foot fence around the property. Although it only encloses about 80 acres of the land she actually owns, she explained that she could not stand the sounds of the coyotes howling outside her window at night and that she needed to have some sort of peace. But she also had some creepy encounters while living there. Since I was a young child, she did not go into these details at the time. She lives alone, so I understand why she wanted to feel some semblance of security in those deep woods. We are initially from the bayous of Louisiana, so being in this environment was rather new for us. Despite initially being unfamiliar with the land, I eventually learned to navigate the area very well as a child. I had a few favorite spots, and one was up a small foothill in the deepest part of the woods. I would go up very often. Eventually, a small path was established in the brush because I would go up there so frequently. I would show everybody my little oasis. In 2008, when I was around 10 years old, I took a summer trip to my aunt's and brought my best friend Alex with me. She and I often took trips together. This was not her first time accompanying me to the farm, but she wasn't super familiar with it like me. I remember being in the woods with her at my favorite spot, sitting together and listening to Katy Perry while playing Doodle Jump on our new iPad Touch. This makes me laugh to remember, but we were just trying to enjoy the nature while getting our fill of new tech, I guess. We were there for quite some time, enjoying ourselves and talking about random kid stuff. Then there was this shift in the air. Almost like a suffocating stillness and silence fell upon the woods. I paused the music and looked at Alex, who was already staring at me with concern and worry on her face. We stayed still and silent for a minute, tilting our heads to listen to the woods and search for any unfamiliar sounds that normally crescendoed during the day and night across the farm. There were no birds, no summer bugs, and the trees almost seemed to be frozen in time, as if the light winds that normally rustled their leaves left us ultimately. It was a vulnerable, terrible feeling, and I knew Alex felt it too. Then began the sound of footsteps coming from even deeper in the woods. It took a moment for me to determine the sound, but the distinct rhythm of weight being picked up and put down on the leaves and brush was impossible not to notice. It was bipedal and heavy, coming up towards us from a steep slope down the side of the mountain. I remember thinking that a human couldn't move so quickly through that part of the wood since it was very thick with growth, fallen branches, trees, and rocks, making it hard for even the most agile and small of children to navigate alone. It felt as if the woods lay still and wait while these footsteps made their way swiftly up the steep incline toward us. "Do you hear that?" I asked Alex in a whisper. She nodded. "It sounds like footsteps." I continued. She nodded again, looking like she was about to burst into tears from fear. I took her hand and began running down the makeshift path with her, trying not to fall or let her lag behind me too much. We did not stop until we reached the house. I don't think we told anyone about that day because we were too shaken to comprehend what might have been out there. Sure, it could have been some sort of wild animal, but I guess we'll never truly know at this point. The next day I asked Alex if she would return to the spot with me. She was very hesitant at first, but eventually did agree. I said that we could look for signs of maybe some sort of human or whatever animal may have been there. We made our way back to the spot, nervous but determined to discover what had invaded our little sanctuary. When we reached the spot, I looked down toward the direction we had heard the footsteps. I think I even slid down a bit to investigate possible indentations in the brush and leaves. I did not go too far because I was about to lose my nerve, and I hadn't noticed much anyway, so I quickly climbed back up to where Alex waited nervously for me. We decided it must have been some sort of animal or a deer, despite every logical explanation indicating otherwise. I knew what deer sounded like, and this was not a deer, but I wanted to forget it and have fun again. We took our iPods out and began the same ritual of relaxing and playing games while chatting about nonsense. It seemed that things were back to normal and in their natural order again. So we quickly forgot about the terrifying experience and let our naive, childlike wonder take over once again. After a little while, the stillness returned, and it happened so fast it felt as if though the forest took a gasp and never exhaled. This time the footsteps started almost immediately. They were louder and coming from a different direction. The best way I can explain their location is that they were in a similar spot to the day before, but somewhat more to the right, where the forest was very dark, and the incline to the reach was a little bit less steep. I did not wait too long to run, but it was long enough to realize that the sound was faster, closer, and definitely not a deer or a bear. I did not look into the woods too closely because I wanted to get the heck out of there, and I was way too scared to see whatever this was. I knew it was close enough that it would be on us any moment if we did not flee. So without a word, Alex and I took off and ran as fast as possible out of those woods. I'm sorry that this story might not be super exciting, but this was my first creepy experience in the woods. I have since had more as I'm an avid backpacker and love the outdoors, but the experiences on my aunt's land have always stuck with me because they are the most bizarre and inexplicable. If anybody has any ideas of what this could be, please comment down below and let me know. It still sends chills up my spine to remember this whole thing.